Hi, everyone who's joining. We are going to get started in about 1 moment, just letting everyone have a chance to get set up here. See a lot of people joining. So happy to have you. Give you 1 more minute and then we will jump right in. Okay, let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone on the line here with us. So pleased to have you here. We have folks from all around the world. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Shelley West from the Advisory Board for the Arts. I'm going to be moderating our webinar today. I am so excited to share this content with you. Over the next hour, you'll be getting an exclusive sneak peek at the data from our Culture and Community in a Time of Crisis survey, which is a recent survey of over 100,000 Americans about their experiences with the arts during the COVID-19 pandemic. Before we dive into the content though, let's take a quick look at the incredible community of arts organizations that has come together, not just for the webinar today, but actually for this research itself. So as you see here, this is a list of all of the organizations that have signed up to join us today. The fact that the font is so tiny and basically unreadable is a testament to how exciting the release of this data really is. We have people from a broad spectrum of arts and culture organizations, from art museums and theaters to operas and zoos, truly an A to Z experience here. And we want to take advantage of all of your insights and your ideas. I'm sure many of you sort of see the Zoom interface in your sleep, but for some of you it's a little newer. We're going to be using two different functions here. So the first is the Q&A function. You should be able to find this either at the top of your screen if you're in full screen mode, or at the bottom of your screen if you're not in full screen mode, but you are on mute and no video. But you will be able to submit questions to our panelists using this Q&A function. I and my colleague Karen Freeman, who's also on the line, will monitor this Q&A and we'll pass those questions along, as many as we can, to our panelists as we go through and at the end. You can also use the chat to communicate. So you can use that if you have any technical issues. Many of you are being kind enough to say hello to us via chat right now, which is great. So you can send those through the chat if you have any problems, or if you want to interact with us or each other. We will be recording this webinar, and the recording as well as a synthesis of the key findings will be available to you on our website. So let's get our fingers and our minds warmed up a little bit here. So using the chat, go ahead and type in what you personally have been missing the most about arts and culture during this closure. Go ahead and type that into the chat, send it to everyone. And we can get a good vision of what people are missing here. So I see interaction, I see live performances, being inspired, just seeing people. Certainly feel that. Connection, absolutely, we'll see that a lot. Seeing people smile. So keep those coming. Super excited to get back to it. And actually, as part of our data today, we'll see what Americans overall are missing as part of the arts. So again, we will be recording this. You can access the recording and a synthesis at advisory board at our website, advisoryarts.com. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're all doing here today. So many of you on the line. But with the pandemic, when it first began getting really serious here in the United States, which was in late March, which simultaneously feels like 5 minutes and 5 years ago at the same time. But we at the Advisory Board for the Arts, we knew that there was a need to understand the role that arts and culture would play in this time of unprecedented challenges. And not surprisingly, we were not the only ones wondering that. We were not the only ones who knew that that was important. And so we were lucky enough to have some conversations with Slover Lynette and LaPlaca Cohen, two leading arts organizations who are on the line today. And what we found is there was actually a groundswell of interest in understanding these insights to help arts organizations make decisions about how to best serve their audiences. And thus this special 2020 edition of Culture Track was born through a collaboration of not only our organizations, but a huge number of partners and advisors. Many of you on the line today took part by soliciting responses from your subscribers, your ticket buyers, your donors. Over 700 organizations took part. So thank you not only for your participation today, but for your participation in the research itself. We have three panelists who are going to walk us through the data today. Jen Benoit Bryan, Madeline Smith from Slover Lynette, and Michael Crawley from LaPlaca Cohen. I will give them more proper introductions in just a moment, but first I want to take a step back and share a little more with you about the Advisory Board for the Arts. We have had the pleasure of welcoming many of you to past webinars, but many of you are new to us, and we're so excited to have you for the first time today. So for a brief overview, I'm going to turn it over to the CEO and founder of the Advisory Board for the Arts, Chris Denby. Chris?
Thank you, Shelley, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. It's fantastic to be with you with 500 individuals from all around the world. It's thrilling, exciting. We really appreciate your doing this. This is our 13th webinar in a series that we've been doing since March in support of the world of the arts everywhere. And what we're hoping to do with these weekly or bi-weekly webinars is give you a little bit of snippet of help, ideas, support through this terrible crisis that we're all living through. And we invite you to go to our archive of previous webinars on our website if you're interested in seeing any aspect of this. Webinars pertaining to fundraising, to strategic planning, to audience development, to digital engagement through the crisis. So a lot more available there. For those of you who join us today who are not familiar yet with the Advisory Board for the Arts, we are a new company. We just started less than a year ago at this point, and our objective is to find breakthrough ideas for arts organizations, whether it is ideas about how do you develop sustainable long-term donors, to how do you think about building new audiences, developing new strategies for that. A lot of the ideas and strategies that we develop come from outside of industry or from across the world and across the world of the arts. We are a membership organization, and that our objective is to partner with arts organizations over the course of many, many years to become their sort of insight into the broader world. Our objective is to cover issues, everything from audience to donor growth to education strategy, revenue strategies, and so on and so forth. So we hope you'll check us out. Take a look at our website at advisoryarts.com, or if you're interested in more information, just write to me directly at chris.denby@advisoryarts.com. We look forward to hearing and learning about your own organizations, and the more we learn, the more we are effective with our own members and in doing things like this. So appreciate you joining us. Today should be incredibly interesting, very, very important topic. So with that, back to you, Shelley, and welcome everyone.
Great, thanks, Chris. So we have three really exceptional panelists today who are going to be walking you through this data. It is not an exaggeration to say they have been spending pretty much every moment of every day for the last couple of months in this data. So let me give them a proper introduction before handing it over to them. So we have Jen Benoit Bryan and Madeline Smith from Slover Lynette. Jen is a VP and co-director of research, and Madeline serves as a project director. Sliver Lynette, if you're not familiar, is a social research firm for the cultural sector, and they focus, among other things, on how people and communities connect to the arts. And from LaPlaca Cohen, we have Michael Crawley. Michael is a partner at LaPlaca Cohen, where he serves as the Chief Marketing Officer. LaPlaca Cohen is a strategy and marketing firm based in New York City. They serve as thought partners to organizations across a multitude of disciplines, including arts and culture. So I'm going to be handing the presentation over to our panelists now. Remember to submit your questions via the Q&A function. Karen and I will be monitoring that, and we will pass those questions on perhaps in the middle, but certainly at the end, so be sure to submit. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the delightful introduction, Shelley and Chris, and thanks to Karen too. As we've been really designing a research project from scratch on a very fast track, given the emergence of COVID and our emerging understanding of how severe this crisis would be for the arts and culture sector. We've been so thankful for the many advisors and partners that have been part of this work. And I will say that Karen, Pope, Shelley, and Chris were some of the first people that we reached out to and talked to about how can we help? How can we jump into this real sense of void in these challenging and uncertain times for arts and culture organizations in order to help them really make informed decisions going forward. And we're really honored to be able to use this platform that they've developed throughout this crisis to share some preliminary findings before they go public at the end of June with all of you, because we want, the reason we're doing this is to help arts and culture organizations. We want to get these findings in your hands as quickly as we possibly can. And so, as Shelley encouraged, we'd love to hear your questions, your comments. We'll take as many of them as we can during this 1 hour session. And we're also welcome, we welcome any emails or notes to us afterwards too, to expand on what we've shared.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And a special thank you to our Culture Track study participating organizations who've also joined us this morning. Just for a quick history of Culture Track, LaPlaca Cohen first launched Culture Track in 2001. The study was launched in response to the September 11th attacks. And the study was fielded to help cultural organizations understand the hearts, minds, and desires of cultural consumers as we collectively navigated that moment of crisis in our nation. And now, nearly 20 years later, we find ourselves at a moment of dual crises in our nation. First, the ongoing global health pandemic of COVID-19, as well as our nation's other ongoing pandemic, that of systemic racism, social injustice, and racial inequity. So it is through those dual lenses that we'll be looking at the data as we create meaning and disseminate those findings throughout the summer, as well as we consider potential future iterations of fielding the study in the fall. Before we get cracking on the data and the early results, I want to quickly make some thank yous. A big thank you to the team at Advisory Board for the Arts for your fruitful thought partnership throughout this process. Thank you to our funders at Art Bridges, the Terra Foundation, and the Wallace Foundation. And lastly, thank you to our functional partners for your services and support, those being Wilkening Consulting, Nork Amerispeak, Focus Vision, and Microsoft. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Slover Lynette for some early results.
Great. So as researchers, it's part of our core to really make sure that you understand who we spoke to so you can interpret these findings really accurately. And I'm going to step back a little bit and talk about our early thought process here. And when we realized we were at this moment of crisis and reckoning in some ways, we realized that we wanted to hear from two main groups of people here. We wanted to hear from the average American with many varied levels and types of connection to arts and culture. But we also wanted to hear from arts attenders who are more affiliated, who might have deeper connections. And we wanted to kind of oversample or hear from even more of those so that we'd be able to compare lots of different subgroups within that sector fruitfully. So we put out an open call to any arts and culture organization who primarily serves adults to participate in this research by sending out a common survey instrument to a portion of their lists. And I will say that early on, when we were talking to Advisory Board for the Arts, we thought we might get participation from 50 or 75 organizations, and over 700 expressed interest, and we ended up with 653 that actually sent the survey out to a portion of their lists. That provided us with a sample of over 120,000 people across the country. We do have a couple of Canadian organizations that asked if they could participate, and we included them as well, although the data we'll share here is about the US population. This survey was conducted between April 29th and May 19th, and so it is already a little bit out of date. This is a crisis that is changing, and it's a little hard to find firm ground under your feet. In addition to the fact that there is this second level of crisis with the systemic racism that Michael mentioned that has shifted our focus, I think, even more towards an equity lens as we analyze and interpret and make recommendations for arts and culture organizations out of this data. So we have these two overlapping populations, the general public and the highly affiliated, parts of culture organizations. And what we did next was to create a weighting scheme that would let us combine those two populations together and weight that data so that it's representative of the US general population. That helps us control for some of the bias that we know are part of arts and culture organization lists, while also giving us this ability to dig really deeply into different parts of the sector while keeping them kind of back in proportion with the general population. So the data that you'll see that we're sharing here will be representative of the US general population, and we're going to sort of layer on to that a few places where we look at the particularly highly affiliated, so members or subscribers, also weighted. So you can get a sense of how those different groups are answering a little bit differently in terms of behaviors, attitudes, and needs going forward. So just to give you an at-a-glance look, many of you are part of arts and culture organizations. We really didn't put too many filters on who could participate. So we have everyone from a knitting group in Sacramento to a walking club in Maine, and along with the more traditional arts and culture organizations that we're all familiar with. We have a really big proportion, a little over half, who are part of museums and collections, but that's defined really broadly: history, children's museums, natural science, all kinds of things there. And then a really big cohort here of performing arts, which again is very broad in scale, from small ensemble groups to orchestras, operas, pop music groups, all different kinds of organizations. And it's fairly representative in terms of geography. We've included some markers on the sort of median level of budget of the organizations participating was 5 million. The full-time employees, the median was 45, and then 90,000 visitors per year on average. So just so you get a sense of the scope and the kind of breadth of organizations that are participating. I just want to pause slightly and acknowledge the fact that, as I think it won't come as a big surprise to most of us, but when we do look at the respondents who came in through arts and culture organization lists, as we'd expect, we see that those aren't very representative of the US population on a number of dimensions. And the ones that are most critical now, and I think for the future, have to do with race and ethnicity. And so one of the lenses that, as Michael mentioned, that we're going to be bringing to this report in much more depth going forward is a real dive into race and ethnicity, and kind of what are the themes, what are we learning and hearing from African American and Black respondents, from Hispanic and Latinx respondents in particular, given that those are the two groups who are most underrepresented on art museum, performing arts, all of these genres of arts and culture organization lists. So more to come there. Do think of these as preliminary findings, and just know that we're continuing to dig in and keeping that as a real focus of our work. So we're going to talk about 5 main topics here. We're going to go through them relatively quickly, but just so you get a sense of the areas that we'll be discussing emerging findings from. So we want to ground ourselves in an understanding of how the crisis is affecting Americans, what people want most from culture during COVID, what do they want right now from arts and culture organizations, We have a much deeper dive into the role of digital in audience engagement than we've ever done before. So we're delighted to share some emerging findings to us over the last week or so with all of you here today. We'll be thinking about a few questions that provide some insights on plans for future attendance among the public, and then some measures of philanthropy during COVID-19 and in comparison to before COVID-19, so you can get a sense of that. And then just to note that there are a few places where we talk about now or today, and just keep in mind that that refers to when the survey was in the field in late April through mid-May.
Thanks, Jen. So first, we'd like to dive into giving you a sense of who we heard from and how COVID-19 is affecting them. So you'll see in this great infographic, just a sense on the left side of the screen of where our respondents came from. Again, this is weighted data, but you'll see that it's really nicely reflective of people throughout the United States. In the center here, we have a little bit of a breakdown of where they come from, again, and what their affiliation to the arts looks like. 77%, about 3/4 of our sample, have no formal affiliation with the arts, meaning that they're not subscribers, members, volunteers, or artists. But we have taken a broad definition in terms of what arts and culture means. So we are going to continue to look at different types of people based on what type of arts they're attending or how frequently they're going outside of this formal affiliation that we're sharing with you today. In terms of income, average income of our sample is about $75,000. And you'll see to the right breakdown of age, keeping in mind that we only wanted to hear from respondents who are above the age of 18. You'll see that Gen Z is a bit smaller than one would expect, but that accounts for a significant portion of that group. Race and ethnicity, about 60% of our sample is white or Caucasian, again weighted so that it closely matches the census. So we'll really be able to do a deep dive into some of these subgroups given that really robust sample size that we'll have. And then again, we see a breakdown of education at the bottom here as well. In terms of COVID impact people are having, there's certainly, of course, an emotional and mental impact it's having on people in their day-to-day lives. You'll see that about half of people select a top 2 box, indicating that they're feeling more bored during times like this, more worried or afraid, as well as less connected to others or less calm than they would during a normal period. To the right, you'll see some of the physical impacts that people are also feeling or facing during this crisis. Many at the time the survey were fielded were still under a stay-at-home order. Over 1/3 were caring for children, which I'm sure many of you know really changes things on a day-to-day basis. 12%, so about 1 in 9, either themselves have been sick due to COVID or have known someone close to them fall ill. And then 40%, 4 in 10, have had a change to their income, with 11% of our sample no longer having any income right now.
In terms of what people miss most from culture right now, there, I think, are some really interesting results to share. And I want to start by talking about an initial hypothesis that we had as we were thinking about what to ask here. And one question we were asking ourselves was, will arts and culture be as important to people's lives during a crisis like COVID compared to beforehand? And we honestly didn't know what the answer would be for the general public. And what we see is that the importance of arts and culture among the public as a whole is fairly constant. In fact, it's ticked up by a couple of percentage points compared to before COVID-19. But that proportion among the general public is fairly small. 37% of people overall believed that arts and culture was important or very important before COVID-19, and 40% during this crisis. And that feels like a call to action to me. I believe that arts and culture organizations can be relevant to a broader swath of the community, so just something to keep in mind. In pink, you'll see I've included the proportions for a subset here. So these are members or subscribers who have either or both of those relationships with any kind of arts or culture organization. And we can see that the proportions are much higher. They're almost twice as likely to believe that arts and culture is important, which makes sense given how connected they are to that sector. But for them, the importance has actually fallen by just a couple of points. So something to keep in mind, that of those who maybe are less connected, that they are still seeing an active role for arts and culture during a crisis like COVID. So the follow-up question here that feels essential to so many arts and culture organizations is, to what extent do people see this role for them? And we were a bit heartened that only 4% of the general public said that there's really no role for arts and culture organizations to play during crisis that would be helpful to them. That most people saw a number of different ways for arts and culture organizations to help. And those kind of fall into a few main themes. So one way that they want arts and culture orgs to help them is by helping them connect with other people and to help them process. They're looking for some kinds of practical support. These are a little bit lower on the list, so they're not actually included here. We took the top few options, but that is a theme. They're looking for emotional support. So laughter and relaxation is at the top of this list. Having hope is particularly high here. Having hope is even higher for African-American respondents. And then some are looking for a sense of escapism. They want distraction. They want to be thinking or talking about things other than COVID during the crisis. So we've called out a few places where there are differences between the general public and those who have these higher connections to arts and culture organizations through membership or subscription. And what I take away from this is the fact that they're not very far apart. I think that people, regardless of their past connection to arts and culture, are looking for the same general kinds of support from arts and culture organizations. And so there's real opportunity to connect more deeply with a broader connection, broader section of the public, while also maintaining your connections with organizations that you may, with individuals who are already connected to you deeply. Great. So we also wanted to understand what it is about the in-person arts and culture experience that people were missing. So Shelley asked you this question earlier, and a lot of the themes that you shared align with what we're seeing here. The sense of connection, the wanting human connection, came up many times in that list, and that was the most frequently selected option, both for the general public as well as for the more affiliated members or subscribers in that sample. There's a lot of emotional, people are missing the emotional qualities that they were getting out of arts and culture before too. Having fun and being able to relax and feel less stressed. Learning is one where members or subscribers are a little more likely to want that quality. And then a little further down on the list than we might have expected is actually experiencing art performances or performers in person at 29% of the general public. It's super interesting to us because it comes so much lower than many of these emotional or connection needs that people have. It is higher among the subscribers and members in the audience, but it's still not the most sought out kind of quality or the most missed quality of arts and culture. And then we asked very broadly, without the arts and culture lens, what people are, what they want more of in their lives at this point when the survey was taken. And some kind of escapism, getting outdoors was a theme there, but then connection with other people is also really high, that feels like a universal need among people during this crisis. So we're going to dive next into the role of digital engagement, and all of these big numbers in pink are about the general public. So the takeaway that we have here is that digital is a really powerful audience retention tool and an audience building tool, but at least as it's currently being deployed, it's not a great revenue driver for organizations, which I'm sure is not news to most of you who are grappling with this very question. At the national level, looking at the average American, we see that over 3/4 have seen arts and culture organizations offering at least one kind of digital activity during COVID. So the things that you're putting together, the tools, the ways to connect, the resources are getting on people's radars, and not just the people who are walking through your doors. Over half have used or participated in one of these digital offerings from an arts or culture organization during COVID, but just 2% of the total US population has paid for one or more digital offerings from arts and culture organizations. In terms of the kinds of content, this providers that people are going to for this digital content, individual performer or artist is at the top of the list, which again felt a little surprising to us. And then we have a three-way tie among the general public for art and design museums, performing arts centers, zoos, and aquariums. For the subscribers and members in the pink to the right, all of these are a little bit higher. They're just more likely to be using content from pretty much any source that relates to arts and culture during this crisis. And then on this next slide, we've broken down different individual types of digital activities. And the initial theme that we're starting to pull out of this is the fact that live performances and content that's available on demand has the highest level of awareness and use, whereas some of the more interactive options like online community meetings or live interactive events are just not quite as widely adopted. And the piece that we don't have here is, how available some of those things are, which may be affecting people's awareness and use of them. But that does seem like, at least initially, given what's out there, one of the main takeaways here. I will say that we haven't layered on the more affiliated comparison. They're much more likely to be aware of and participating in almost all of these kinds of activities, with the notable exception of online materials for kids, which seems to be pretty universal in its appeal. It's not, those who are members or subscribers are almost as likely, are sort of at the same level of likelihood to be aware and using them as those with no connection to arts and culture. So that's one where a prior connection or a formal connection isn't as important an influencer in who's using that content. So the follow-up question is, what value are these digital offerings providing to people, and what qualities are they getting out of them? So first, in terms of value, we see that value is relatively high. We asked people to rate these on a 5-point scale. This is the proportion who selected a 4 or 5 in terms of super valuable for these activities. And value isn't driven very much by formal relationships to arts and culture. So again, here's a place where we're not seeing big differences, where members and subscribers are getting way more value out of things than the general public, which I think is a testament to the way that some of these digital offerings have been designed. They're equally relevant and useful and valuable, regardless of those kinds of formal connections to culture. But there's not a huge gap here. So apps are at the bottom at 58%. Again, online materials for kids are kind of an outlier at the very high level of value here. It serves a very practical purpose, that one, which is kind of nice. So turning next to the qualities that people are getting out, frequency, and then we'll get to the qualities. So here we have frequency of use, and I've highlighted in pink the digital offerings that have been used, are most likely to have been used many times in a 30-day period during COVID-19. So again, online materials for kids stands out as the single activity that's most likely to be used many times during this crisis. Podcasts, which given the way that content is structured and delivered, makes sense that it's also most particularly likely to be used many times. Online classes is the next one. So it's kind of series, it makes sense, again, I think for podcasts and online classes, those are designed as series, so it makes sense people are using them multiple times. Other things that are much less likely to be used multiple times are live stream performances, which are kind of one-off events usually, virtual tours or VR experiences at 10%, and then online exhibitions or galleries. And just so you get a sense, we asked people about which of these activities they'd participated in, had they done once, a few times, or many times during the last 30 days. And so this just gives you a sense of where is the most frequent activity happening among digital content. Great, so in terms of qualities, what are people getting out of these digital resources that they're participating in? We see at the top of the list here, fun and relaxation. So those kinds of emotional connections are near the top of the list. Learning or experiencing something new is really high. That escapism theme is coming up, that digital activities are offering that, that quality to the people participating in them. And again, we also see that for the most part, the general public and the more affiliated among them, the subscribers and members, aren't very far apart in terms of what kinds of qualities they're getting out of this these digital experiences, which I think is important to kind of note. The next slide compares what qualities people are getting out of these activities with what they told us they missed most about cultural activities during the pandemic. So here the comparison in blue is circling back to that, what is the quality that they're missing most during that pandemic? And we see really nice alignment right off the bat with fun. 54% are saying they're getting that quality out of digital activities from arts and culture. 53% are told us that they miss that about in-person arts and culture activities. So that's great to see. A few of these have a little less alignment though, and I think the one that I want to call out most specifically is far down on the list at 27%, spending quality time with my friends or family. So that's only a quarter of the people who are participating in arts and culture are selecting that as a top 5 option here from their digital activities, compared to 65% who told us that was what they were most missing from arts and culture in-person activities. And so we started to sort of brainstorm and think about, are there ways to provide that sense of connection even through a digital platform? It's definitely harder. It's not as easy as some of these other qualities, I think, to build in and to incorporate, but there may be opportunity there if we can think about how do you build in a sense of connection. And then of those who had used digital materials for kids, we just asked a follow-up question about what kinds of activities and education programs, serving that very practical need was the most commonly used digital content area for kids. But there's also sort of games, do-it-yourself projects. Parents are looking for support through at-home follow-along activities that they can then do with their kids, lesson plans for parents. So kind of a mix of fun and practical purposes here.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I'm gonna break in for a moment to ask a question. Thank you to everyone who has been putting questions in the chat and in the Q&A. One of the most frequent questions we've gotten is, are you going to have the slides? So I will just answer that. We are going to post a replay of the webinar. This data has actually not even been released yet. So the data themselves, the slides themselves, will be available on the Culture Track website at the end of June. The recording of the webinar will be available right away. A more substantive question that we got that I thought, Michael, perhaps you could answer. But we got a question about, we keep talking about cultural activities, arts and culture activities. Can you explain for folks how we defined that, or if we defined it? Was it a list? Did we say this is what culture is? I know that's a long-standing Culture Track question.
Sure. I'll let Laura Lynette speak to the actual spots and dots that people were able to choose from. But I think holistically, one of our findings, our headlines coming out of Culture Track 2017 was the democratization of culture, right? And that we as arts administrators, marketers, et cetera, had to stop defining what culture was and allow our current audiences, as well as our non-attending audiences, to define what culture is for both themselves and for our organization. So I think we've completely broadened the definition of culture for the purposes of the fielding of this study. I know all the questions that we asked are available on the Culture Track website. So you actually look at all the different sort of disciplines that we sort of defined as such. But I'll let Jen jump in there as well.
Yeah, for most of these questions, we let people self-define, as Michael said, in the spirit of an expansion of arts and culture. We do have a list of 34 activities that we ask people, which of these have they done in the past year, so we get a good sense of their past relationships to culture. And we followed up with a question about which of those that you've done do you consider to be culture? And that's another layer of analysis that we plan to do. It's a nice one because we have comparable data to the 2017 Culture Track study, so we can do some comparisons about how the needle on some of those definitions of culture among the general public may be moving.
Just to add to that, the path that we tried to lead respondents down was once they were exposed to that list of activities, identified what they'd done and what they would personally consider culture, we sort of brought them back to that framework throughout, saying, of the activities that you consider culture, and ask the following questions around participation, what they miss, to keep it grounded in hopefully their more expanded definition of culture.
Great. And one more question before we keep going. This is less the purely out of the data, but given the expertise on the line here, we've been getting a lot of questions from arts organizations about, is digital here to stay? So is this sort of a flash in the pan, we just have to do digital now? Or do we believe that arts organizations will continue to incorporate, or should continue to incorporate, digital even after some of the restrictions are gone? Would be interested in folks' sort of take on that, what you see in the data, and then just, of course, the general expertise with working with so many arts organizations.
That's a great question. I'd love to jump in with a really emergent data point that we didn't share in the slides. That's just, coming together over the last couple of days, honestly. But it's one of the dives that we're doing into this data is to look within genres. So for orchestras specifically, or for art museums, what of those who had participated in arts or culture digital activities from an art museum, for instance, during COVID, what proportion of those had actually been physically to an art museum, any art museum, within the last year, and what proportion hadn't walked through the doors of an art museum in the past year? And what we're starting to see is that the digital activity is engaging people who at least haven't been to that kind of genre of culture within the last year. That for art museums, 60% of the people using digital content from art museums during COVID had been to an art museum in 2019, but 40% had not. And the next layer that we're adding to that is to look and see, are those who had been in person different demographically from those who hadn't? And there's some really, I think, exciting initial results here that indicate that in terms of some of the measures that we know our arts and culture is not representative on, in terms of those with high school educations or lower, in terms of those with lower incomes, in terms of those people who are African American or Black and Hispanic or Latinx, the proportion who are using digital activities who hadn't been in person is much higher than those who had. And so these findings are very emergent, but I think they speak to what we believe, which is that digital offerings can expand your reach and your relevance beyond your usual audience. And this is, if not now, in terms of when we do that work, I don't know when there's going to be a better sort of call to action for organizations to do that. So that feels like at least an initial indicator to me that digital will be an important layer, not replacing the in-person activities, but maybe integrating more fully with it going forward in new and innovative ways.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in and say we've seen a lot of folks in the field who are now looking to digital as a potential revenue stream, right? So as they reopen, especially in performing arts, how can they layer on digital, right, as both a resource for the community, but also as a potential revenue stream? I think we've also seen a lot of arts organizations who have had to reduce their staffs, right? So thinking creatively about, as you rethink staff structure and hopefully grow in the near future, how can you staff internally so that you are more of a robust content provider on a parallel path with reopening your live collection and your live programming?
Yeah, and I think what digital does is it challenges arts organizations to rethink who their audience is or can be, particularly if you're thinking of a performing arts organization. Is our audience just the people who come to us to see something, or can our audience be expanded to this online content platform where we may be able to reach people who will never come through our doors because perhaps they live in an entirely different state from where we are, but can we expand who our audience is by including these online platforms? The challenge is what Michael's bringing up, how can we turn that into a revenue generator? But I think it's a really interesting time to be able to expand who is aware of you and who is participating in things that you're able to offer.
Great, thanks. Let's get back to the data. Thank you so much for answering those questions.
Yeah. So of course, in addition to understanding how people are doing right now and what they're doing right now, we wanted to know how they're feeling about the future, particularly as it comes to re-engaging with arts and culture activities. So you'll see people are most excited to reconnect with others as soon as they can, when they can get back together in person. They want to go out and socialize either in people's homes or go out and socialize at a bar and restaurant. When it comes to things that we may consider, more formally the arts, you'll see third on the list is attending a park, garden, or zoo, where that's popular both among the general population as well as subscribers and members. Just to give a couple of numbers around some more of the arts activities that we asked about, you'll see that, I guess it's sixth on the list is attending a concert and musical performance. And as you'll see, matching earlier trends, those with a higher affiliation to the arts, members and subscribers, are even more excited about the possibility of resuming in-person arts activities. We also asked about the likelihood or the interest in attending a play or musical. About 11% of the general population said they were most excited to do that when they resumed activities, compared to 22% of members or subscribers. About 10% of 10% of the general public said they were interested in visiting art museums. About 10% said they were interested in visiting history museums. So both a little bit lower on the list, but of course members and subscribers were much more excited at the possibility of re-engaging in those types of activities. When it comes to how much planning they're doing right now, at the time the survey was fielded, really most people felt like they weren't ready to begin thinking about what resuming attendance could look like. Only about 13% of people selected a top 2 box, indicating that they were beginning to plan for activities in any way, and that's only slightly higher for members and subscribers. So at that time, both groups were a little bit still on a hold pattern, waiting to see what was going to come next. Before we share with you some of the things the general population said would make them feel more comfortable resuming in-person activities, we wanted to do a really quick poll to see what types of things you or your organization were thinking about implementing. So perfect. So yeah, you wouldn't mind sharing with us what's on your mind as things that may help re-engage your visitors to come back. And Shelley or Karen, I'll turn to you to let us know when we have enough responses to close the poll.
It's still rising very quickly. We have about 250 of our attendees who have responded. So let's give it another 10 to 15 seconds for people to read and respond. And then I will go ahead and end the polling and we can share. It is still going pretty fast. Wow.
Thank you for your participation.
Looks like it's slowing down now, so 5-second warning. I'm about to end the poll. Get your answer in while you still can, and we will end it now. Here you go.
Great. So it looks like the 2 most popular initiatives are increased cleaning measures for all touch surfaces and enforcement of masks for staff. Well, we also see that quite a few, 3/4 of our sample, are thinking about reducing admission as well as the enforcement of masks for visitors. Some are thinking about ways to implement health screenings. And then of course there are a portion who are still not sure, or like our attenders at the time, sort of on a hold pattern to see what is advised to come next. So this is great. And you'll see that a lot of what you all are already planning is a lot of what we heard from people as some things that would be important for them in terms of feeling comfortable around resuming in-person activities. These are the top 5 things that people said that they would need to make them feel more comfortable resuming in-person arts and culture experiences. And as you'll see highlighted on the right of the screen, 3 of these things we consider internal initiatives that you could implement at your organization. And it's great to see that essentially all 3 are things that are top of mind for organizations we have on the line: increased cleaning, reduced admission, and the enforcement of masks for visitors. We did also ask about the enforcement of masks for staff. Quite a few people were interested in that, just not quite to the top 5. We were discussing that perhaps visitors already assume that staff may be required to wear masks and that it would be a little bit harder to enforce their neighbor wearing masks. So they may turn to the organization to make them feel safe by asking all visitors to wear masks at the time. But then of course, there are some external factors that are beyond all of our control that we are all eager to have, that our general population reported being important as well, such as a vaccine or an announcement indicating that it would be safe to return resuming some of these activities. We also wanted to understand during this time, and generally, how much people are looking for arts organizations to change and in what ways would be best for them. And you'll see to the right that 3/4 of people, this is a general population number, indicated that there is some way that arts and culture organizations could change in the future to be better for them. And this is a similar trend across members and subscribers. This number just bumps up slightly to 75%, indicating that both the general population and those highly affiliated group are all eager to still see change in these types of organizations. And you'll see the type of change that they're looking for on the left. Some change is just a little bit more around the tone or vibe of the experience, wanting it to be more fun, wanting it to be friendlier. But a lot had, a few had quite more of a community focus to them, I would say. This idea of supporting local artists, supporting their own community by treating their employees fairly, and engaging the diverse voices of the community to be a part of the art space. And you'll see, particularly among some of these community-focused ones, those with the high affiliation care just as much, if not more, about these things happening in arts organizations to make them better or potentially more relevant for them in the future. The last section, we wanted to just do a quick dive into some trends that we're seeing in terms of giving, both before and during the crisis, and how people are thinking about giving at a time like this. So you'll see that about 2/3 of people in the general population do worry that arts and culture organizations in their area will be struggling financially during and after this time. And that's really interesting to see compared to the number of people who felt the arts were important to them either before or right now, which was a little lower, but people are still generally worried about the financial health of these organizations. However, some are unsure what their giving pattern will be, in that they may think other organizations may need their money with more urgency than arts organizations. But you do see that 16% of people wholeheartedly disagree with that statement, that other organizations may need their financial support more. And of course, among members and subscribers, both of these numbers rise. About 3/4, 77% of members and subscribers worry that organizations are struggling, and 22% of that high affiliated group disagree with this statement and feel that arts warrant their support just as much as any other organization during times like this. To give a glimpse of what past giving had looked like and what giving might look like at the time our survey was fielded, you'll see that 1/4 of the general population report that they have donated to the arts, cultures, and humanities sometime in the last 2 years, pre the situation we're living in right now. And during the situation we're living in right now, about 7% have donated to arts, culture, and humanities. And so you'll see that number's a little bit lower. It is a smaller period of time we were asking about compared to 2 years. And at a glance across the board, giving was down just a little bit during this time, probably related to the fact that we were asking them to share what giving had looked like, let's say across 45 days, rather than what giving had looked like across 2 years. But of those people who are giving to arts, cultures, and humanities, you'll see on the right side of the screen, they're most likely to give to humanities organizations or to individual performers, artists, bands, or ensembles. And I think that's a pretty interesting finding. For me, it builds on this idea of wanting to support their community and wanting arts organizations to support local artists. So that's sort of top of mind for them in terms of what they're giving to at the moment. But you'll see in pink, those who are members and subscribers are much more likely to be giving generally and much more likely to be giving to some more of the formal arts organizations or arts organizations that they may have a relationship with already, such as theater groups, museums, and history museums as well. Just to give you a sense of those numbers to the left among members and subscribers, half of members and subscribers say that they donated in 2018 or 2019 to the arts, and 19% of members or subscribers say that they have donated to arts and culture during COVID-19. Great, so I'll pass it back to Michael.
Yeah, so I'm going to take us through a few key takeaways that hopefully can inform some immediate decision-making at your organization and potentially the development of several tactics. So the first key takeaway is the notion that COVID-19 has taken a deep toll on our audiences, right? So we looked at the percentage, 40% of respondents had seen some economic and financial impact. Certainly the health of some of our respondents and those they love and those in their communities, and also the emotional fallout of COVID-19. And it's also worth noting that the COVID-19 pandemic has disproportionately affected communities of color. So again, as we look at the double context of the double crises at this moment, I'm really being mindful of how we reopen our facilities and truly welcome back all members of our community. The next key takeaway is that Americans, however, do believe that arts and cultural organizations have a vital role to play, right? So Jen talked about the uptick from before and after the pandemic, and they are looking for cultural organizations to help them relax, to help them laugh, right? As they come out of quarantine and seek solace and connection at our organizations. They're looking for us to help them stay connected, right? And I think it's important to note that as we see a loosening of restrictions and reopening, there are still members of our communities who either have self-selected or being required to stay in quarantine. So there is still going to be that need for connection even as things reopen. And last but not least, educating their children, right? So I think that's also a consideration in the summertime. We've seen several summer camps, sleepaway camps canceled. How can we continue to be of service to our communities in terms of digital engagement, both this summer and in the potential that we see some communities not reopening schools in the fall? The next key takeaway is the notion that Americans are not making plans to return to arts and cultural activities at this moment. Again, big grain of salt with this one, right? The fact that this survey was fielded in early May. We've seen several museums open with social distancing practices, botanical gardens, et cetera. So, our hope is that if we feel this again in the fall, we see directionally folks that are eager to make plans to visit for those organizations that have announced reopening or have reopened, but potentially less for friends in performing arts, et cetera, who have, many of whom have postponed their seasons until the late fall, early winter, or even into 2021. The next key takeaway is that there's a lot of levers we can pull internally, right? So Madeline talked about this, the notion that 3 out of the 5 top considerations are things that we can control as organizations, be it increased cleaning, reduced emission levels and social distancing, or wearing of masks for visitors, right? So I'd encourage us all to also think about how we're marketing and communicating those to our audiences, right? In terms of photographs of audiences in our spaces wearing masks, et cetera. It's also worth noting the politicization of some of these solutions, right? Certainly the wearing of masks has become politicized throughout our nation. So really being prepared to have those crucial conversations and making sure that our frontline staff workers are prepared for some audiences who might not want to comply with our new policies. And the last key takeaway, that was it. So what's next for this study? We are going to be, as we've all mentioned throughout this presentation, releasing the top line report in less than 2 weeks. So as Shelley mentioned, I encourage you all to visit culturetrack.com or follow us on our social channels, and we will keep you abreast to when that study goes live. Later this summer, at the end of July, we'll be releasing a deep dive report that looks at discipline-specific findings, as well as ethnic racial considerations at this moment in our nation's history, as well as some potential regional considerations and findings. So that will go live at the end of July. And later this summer, we're also going to be releasing a dashboard so that people from all around the globe can access this data, play with the splits, and use it to inform decision-making in their own communities and in their own organizations. So again, all of that information will be made available on culturetrack.com. And it is our hope in fall to go out with a wave of qualitative insights, and then potentially another second round of quantitative in the fall. We are currently in active conversations with potential funders and potential partners about making that second wave a reality. So I encourage you to sign up to our eBlast list to stay abreast to all these developments, as Culture Track is truly a responsive tool that we are committed to keeping in the field for the next few months.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michael, Jen, and Madeline. Wrapping up here real quick, I am going to toss it back to Chris Denby to tell us a little bit more about what's upcoming for Advisory Board for the Arts, as well as we're going to put up a quick feedback poll because your feedback is very important to us. Chris?
Thanks, Shelley. A couple of final points here as we close out. First of all, our next webinar will be Tuesday at 10 a.m. and we will be talking to some of the leaders of the greatest performing halls around the world about what's next for them. will the great performing halls of the world stay the same, or are they too going to have to transform dramatically? We have some amazing panelists who will be joining us. I do hope you'll consider joining us as well. Again, 10 a.m. on Tuesday next week. If you want to register, please go to our website, or you will receive an email from us with the opportunity to register as well. And then finally, simply to say that we are honored to be working with an extraordinary group of arts organizations all around the world. If you're interested in learning more about becoming a member of the Advisory Board for the Arts or what it means, simply email me at chris.denby@advisoryarts.com. It's been an honor to work with LaPlaca Cohen and Slover Lynette, an honor to have these panelists with us today. They do such extraordinary work, and we very much look forward to continuing this collaboration. This has been a really interesting beginning of this journey. So many organizations that participated in this Zoom were part of this process. And so thank you for being part of this process. It is through your input and your participation that we were able to get such rich data. So with that, I want to, again, reiterate my thanks to our panelists, reiterate my thanks to the many hundreds of you from around the world who joined us. We would appreciate your feedback on this and look forward to seeing you perhaps on Tuesday for our very next webinar. Thank you all so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. For those of you whose questions we were not able to get to, please stay tuned for additional data. The Culture Track website, as well as the Advisory Board Arts websites, are great things to monitor. There will be so much more to come. Many of your questions will be answered in the report, and certainly all of us are here to help you from Advisory Board for the Arts, Slover Lynette, and LaPlaca Cohen. Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.